Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Allison Schaberg here with Consolidated Planning Group, and this is the first ever time that we have presented this presentation today, so you're in for a treat, and we are glad you're here today. I am here today with attorney Christina Lesher from the law office of Christina Lesher in the greater Houston area, and Annalee Kruger with Care Right, Inc. And so today what we're going to be talking about is who is on your team. So when it comes to planning for special needs and the future of a loved one with a disability, who's on your team, who needs the seat at the table, and the kind of the whys behind that. So guys, there's a lot of confusion. There's really a lot of confusion in our community of really who does what. And I know that, as we get a lot of calls. We get a lot of calls for requests for legal documents and things like that, and that's not exactly what we do. And I know you guys kind of get a lot of the same as well, huh? So when it comes to planning, there's several people that we really need to have at the table. So we're going to dive deeper into that today. So I always like to do a little bit of a housekeeping when we first get started, and first by saying, we are in webinar mode today. So we know you're here, but we can't see you or hear you. Our chat box is enabled, so you can put your questions in the chat box. We love to take your questions, and we will answer as many as we can. Today's webinar is going to be recorded, so everybody that has registered for today's webinar is going to get a copy of today's slides, so you don't have to take notes on every single thing you hear today. And you will also get a link to the recording as well. So having said that, so just put your questions in the chat box as we go along, and we are going to get started right away. So Annalee, with Care Right, tell us a little bit about you and Care Right, what Care Right does.
Excellent. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. My name is Annalee Kruger. I am the owner of Care Right Incorporated. I started Care Right in 2011 as a national consultancy to really help coach family caregivers and their aging loved ones through that aging, dementia journey, that caregiving journey, and all the way through end of life, so that families across the country can make informed decisions. One of the main services that we provide is what we call aging planning. And part of that is where we facilitate the family meetings for families so that you as family members can make informed decisions about care, current care needs, future care needs, what you should have in order, like your estate document, your financial plan, and all of those types of documents as well. So we really help families just navigate the complexities of family dynamics as families age, but also the caregiving journey and the aging and end of life journey as well. Oh, you're on mute. There you go.
I think from the population that we serve, I mean, this is it kind of goes a lot of different directions, because as a parent, a caregiver for an individual with a disability, so we have to look at our own aging concerns, and when we're no longer able to provide those caregiving services for our loved one with a disability, as well as the future and planning stages for our loved one themselves. So it's kind of two-pronged for the families that we serve, for sure. Christina, tell us a little bit more about you and your firm.
So I am a former social worker who went to law school, and this is my 20th year practicing law, and I am the owner of the firm. We primarily are estate planning attorneys, and I describe us as a cradle to grave disability planner. We work with a lot of families who have special needs children to make sure that they have the correct estate planning documents in place. And also we walk them through the different public benefit programs that they may need to apply for or get on interest lists. And we also do a lot of work and discussion with families about their own aging process, including the funding for their own aging process and including Medicaid options for the parents. So we also do guardianship work as well.
For sure. And, we talk about that a lot as far as, your own aging process and kind of the money that you need in retirement. Families are going to spend 25 to 35 years in retirement, but when we have a loved one with a disability, they may be here 25 to 35 years after we're gone. And I liken that to like a third retirement bucket. Like, when people are planning for retirement, it's a tall order. But when we have a loved one with a disability, and many families have more than one loved one with a disability, so careful planning definitely comes to play. So I'm Allison Schaberg, owner of Consolidated Planning Group. We are a special needs financial planning firm. I jokingly say with Christina, she's the paper and we're the money, right? Yep. So the legal documents are necessary. Those guardianships, special needs trust, those types of things all of those documents that Christina's going to talk about today. But we are the money in the right buckets. How do we maintain eligibility for state and federally funded programs? How much money do we need to fund the special needs trust? How do we make sure that we have a nice, comfortable retirement, but there's still enough money to fund that special needs trust? And then a lot of families have concerns of equality amongst their other children. They might want to be helping with college or weddings or a down payment on a house and things like that. So we kind of make all of those things happen. We're nationally certified as Social Security advisors and members of the Special Needs Planning Academy. And so, people come to us and, they may have already had an advisor in place. There is fewer than 0.1% of financial advisors that are actually nuanced and special needs. And what I would say, and I am a big fan of this, if you're a do-it-yourselfer out there, when it comes to special needs planning, when it comes to your legal documents, when it comes to the money in the right buckets and finances and planning, this is not a DIY project. And I suggest that you work with professionals that are specifically nuanced with special needs, not, your neighbor next door who's a real estate attorney that could throw down a special needs trust for you or something like that. You really want to work with a specialist, because I know we see things all the time, really, that were kind of, it was good intentions, but what was really on those documents was not exactly what you had in mind. So back to you, Annalee. Tell us a little bit more about Care Right.
Well, one of the things I wanted to mention is, as far as the services, a lot of our clients live all across the globe because family caregivers are burning out by the day. They're compromising their careers, their finances, their family relationships at home. And just think about if you're a parent with a special needs child and you've given, you give your own family your all, right? But then you get that call that mom just had a major stroke and she's the caregiver to dad with dementia. It's like, there's only so much of us that we have that we can give, right? So that's why we talk about aging planning, and let's get on top of that. We need to be realistic and know that we don't get healthier as we age. We don't get stronger. We don't get more cognitive. And our family dynamics are going to be very wobbly. You would think that aging process would bring families together, and it often does not. And so my hope would be that we talk about, that as you're thinking about this webinar and as you're on this webinar, that you think about, okay, what do we actually have in place for mom and dad? What if they need care? What do we have addressed already? Do we have our, documents in order? I know Christina is going to be talking about that, but we also need to talk about and be realistic about current care needs and future care needs, so that primary caregiver, whomever that is, whether it's your mom or you, don't end up getting overwhelmed and burned out when that medical crisis happens.
And Annalee, I think that's so critically important. The thing is we all have a lot on our plates all the time. You've got all these full-time job hats that you wear as a parent. And but I think that the key, if you're taking anything away from this, is don't wait for the crisis to happen. The crisis is a crisis, and it is emotional, and it's not good for all of the reasons that we already know that a crisis is bad. But when the crisis happens and you already have a plan, and simply you're going into the crisis plan mode as opposed to we don't have a plan and now we're in crisis mode. And the thing is we don't make decisions as good. When we're in crisis mode and, those stress receptors are going off crazy, we're not making as great of decisions as we would when we're in a calm situation and thoughtfully thinking these things through.
Well, and the other thing too is we know it's just a matter of time when there's going to be a crisis, because we don't get more steady on our feet as we age, right? So you should expect falls to happen and hospitalizations and urinary tract infections, all these things that prompt hospitalizations. But the key is we know that 58% of adult kids will end up thrust into the role of family caregiving without ever having any kind of family meeting to discuss the what-whens of aging. And the reality is most of our families, when they're coming to us, 92% of the families are coming to us in crisis mode, rather than being able to have that emotional bandwidth to be able to really absorb and learn what we're teaching them so that they can make informed decisions. Unfortunately, most families are coming to us completely naive because you're in uncharted territory. They don't know our healthcare jargon, so they'll say things like assisted living and nursing home as if it's the same type of care, and it is completely not. They'll say things like Medicare and Medicaid as if they're the exact same program, and they're not. And most families assume that Medicare is going to pay for all kinds of expenses, and it does not. So unfortunately, families are coming to us, and that's why hopefully on any of you on this webinar, that one of your takeaways is, you know what, it is just a matter of time before we get that call that something has happened to mom or dad. And we need to be able to know, just like you have a financial plan, you pull that out and you're like, okay, this is what we're going to do when this happens. This is, and here's what we have for viable care options. And mom and dad are safe because we have an aging plan in place. Most of the seniors, when I talk to them, what are your goals as you age? It's always been the same thing. And I've been doing this for 30 years. My background too is in social work and executive director in continuing care communities. When I ask aging parents, what are your goals as you age? It is always the same two goals. I want to age in place at home, and I don't want to be a burden on my kids. But it is almost always the adult kids calling us because they're like, I can't keep taking off work, or I burned through FMLA, or I had to cancel yet another vacation, and my husband is really mad because mom fell again, and we have to come to the rescue. And then we still don't have a plan in place. We're just doing crisis. And that's not the answer. You need a viable, actionable plan as your parents age or as you age. And that's what we do.
So, Annalee, as you were talking, I was thinking about, this is kind of a 3-tier for the families that we serve. So it's the parent themselves planning for your own future, but many of us have aging parents ourselves, as well as a loved one with a disability that we are primary caregiver for. So what I would say is, if you're taking notes today, I think it is very, very important to have what I would call very intentional conversations for you and your spouse, of course, but for your aging parents. We see a lot of times your aging parents have documents that haven't been reviewed in 15 or 20 years. I actually had a meeting with somebody this morning that said that their documents haven't been reviewed in 20 years. And so, we certainly suggest and advocate for people kind of revisiting this. I mean, I think you can, touch the treetops annually, but revisiting your legal documents and having those reviewed every 3 years, it's because things change. Things change with the laws as it relates to special needs and trusts and things like that. And Christina will talk more about that. But what I love about Care Right is this grab-and-go binder that Annalee created. So, Annalee, tell us a little bit more about your programs and this grab-and-go binder, because I think that this is so cool.
Thank you. So the birth of the binder, and I got that out perfectly, so that's good. So the birth of the binder came about because As a social worker and admissions coordinator and executive director in long-term care for 18 years, every single day I had families coming in for a tour because mom fell, she broke her hip, she's in the hospital. Hospital says, here's a list of facilities, go find one by noon tomorrow. And that puts the entire family in a total emotional tailspin. So they're literally coming to the facility with this whole like handful of brochures that the hospital discharge planner told them to go tour these facilities. The tour would take an hour, but I would spend 2 and 3 hours at a time with each family because they had no idea what questions to ask, what to look for. They all thought Medicare was going to cover everything indefinitely. When I would ask them, well, does your mom have a living will? Does she have a power of attorney? Does she have long-term care insurance? Is your dad a veteran? You know, who's their funeral home, you know, mortician? And the answers were always, I don't know. Our family never talks about stuff like this. Or there were like this many teeny tiny percentage of adult kids, because it's always the adult kids, and they would bring the healthy parent along, the one that wasn't in the hospital, because we're like, oh, now we have to go find a rehab center for mom. And they're like, oh my gosh, I don't even know what to do about that. It's overwhelming, very overwhelming. And so the grab and go binder came about. It's got 12 tabs in it, or 12 headings. It's a digital binder as well. So it's got 12 headings. It's all the things that families need to have in place. Who's your financial planner? Who's your estate attorney? Who's your long-term care insurance rep? Who are my people that I go to? Like, and my accounts, my passwords, my online assets, my VA military discharge records. It is a very thick, comprehensive, massive checklist of everything you need to have in place. What's your Apple account password? You know, it's all of those things that people just don't think about until you need that information and you can't find it because you're not listed on the HIPAA document, or you never talked about how do I get into your phone and call the people that that I need to call. And so it's really just to get all of your documents in order. And it also helps you identify gaps in your planning. So like if you're the adult kid and you're like, oh, now that I know that Medicare doesn't pay for everything because we're doing this aging planning for mom and dad, we better make sure that we have our stuff buttoned up so that you don't leave your kids in the kind of the pickle that a lot of our aging parents have done. But it also forces you to kind of look at your documents and make sure that they are up to date and that they reflect your current wishes. And one of the mistakes I see families make all of the time, literally every single day, is because most of our clients have dementia or some sort of memory impairment, and they still have someone listed as a power of attorney or as a decision maker who's just simply not decisional at this point because of memory impairment. So it really, and that's part of what we do too, is educate. We're not attorneys, but we educate, you know, like look at your documents. Are they in order? Do they need to be updated? You know, and if you don't have an attorney, because again, my clients live all across the country. So if they don't have an attorney, then we leverage our professional network and help find attorneys and other people that you need on your team so that you all can have the most successful aging journey.
For people that are, listening to this that may be out of state, we serve customers all across the U.S. as well. And one resource, we have, predominant resources and referrals for attorneys across the state of Texas. But the National Association of Elder Law Attorneys is a great website to find an attorney specifically specialized in estate planning and special needs matters. So if you're wondering how to find a good one, I would suggest that. Christina, do you have any other suggestions other than that website?
Nope, that's the go-to place.
National Association of Elder Law Attorneys. So, one thing, Annalee, that, it's so critically important to have this information together. And I have definitely had conversations with people before, and this is true in a lot of people's families, like one person handles the bills, one person handles this kind of stuff, and the other person handles other things. And I had a lady, she was a long time client. And I had spoke to her for many, many, many years. It's like, you got to learn this. You got to know some of the stuff. She didn't want to. She hated it. That was not her wheelhouse. And her husband passed away. And of course, she was dealing with the stress of the loss of her husband. But the fact was, is she did not even know how to log into the bank, right? And he had everything on online banking. And I mean, she was she was very upset and crying just because of what she didn't know and didn't feel capable of wrapping her arms around it. So even if you do have one person that handles it, the other person having at least just a working knowledge, they don't have to do it. You don't have to do everything jointly, but that other person just having a working knowledge of here's where I need to go if I need this, here's the usernames and passwords and things like that. It's so important.
Here's a real life example, because unfortunately, again, despite my best efforts, people come to us in total crisis and overwhelm, and disaster has truly struck the family. And we know this is all going to happen. Again, we have to be realistic, but people just, they don't often move forward until they're in a total bind. And so this is a recent example. So had a family, typical family, mom and dad live in one area, but the kids live nowhere near there. And so what happened is they didn't know about aging planning because they didn't get referred to us. They happened to just find us, which is unusual because all of our families, except for like 2 in the last 12 years, have come from word of mouth referral. Otherwise, people find us on Google. But anyway, so here's what happened. Mom was a primary caregiver to dad. She's in her 80s. She has her own health issues, obviously. She's the primary caregiver to dad, who has definitely progressed dementia to the point where he's sundowning, he's agitated, he's getting combative, he's resisting meals, he's not wanting to take medications, he's fighting her in the shower, and all of this kind of stuff. And she's in her 80s, he's in his 80s, but he's also very strong. He's a retired farmer. So, and I come from farming. So we're like good stock. We're pretty strong. So what happened is unfortunately, the family didn't understand that caregiving can kill. And so mom ended up having a stroke. 63 or 65% of people over the age of 60 who are primary caregivers die prematurely because of the toll of caregiving. And so unfortunately, this is exactly what happened. The kids kept trying to get a hold of mom and dad, and they're like, oh, mom's not answering. And after like 4 or 5 days, the kids are like, hey, did you hear from mom yet? No, nobody had. So the closest daughter lives 5 hours away. So she's like, well, I haven't seen mom and dad for a few months. I'll just drive over and spend the weekend and see what's going on. And so unfortunately, when she got to the door, she rang the doorbell, and dad didn't know who she was because, again, he's got severe dementia. By the time she talked him into letting her in, that she's his daughter, and he looked so unkempt. Mom was actually dead on the kitchen floor. She had died several days prior. So of course the kids find us and they call, and here's the mess that could have been prevented had they had an aging plan. Mom was the keeper of all the information. They had never talked about if there's living will, power of attorney. They don't have any funeral arrangements taken care of. He was still listed as her decision maker and vice versa. He's clearly non-decisional. The kids had no idea what their parents had in order. Obviously, dad can't live on his own anymore because he's unsafe. And so he ended up needing to live temporarily with that daughter that she had to end up bringing him home with her. And within 2 or 3 days, she's just like, oh my gosh, he has his days and nights mixed up. He doesn't know, he just doesn't remember anything. Long story short, we helped them navigate that whole thing. Unfortunately, he needed to go into a secured memory care unit. And where the daughter lives, there's only 2 in her area, and one is female only. And so the other one has like a 5-6 year waiting list. So unfortunately, because they didn't have a proactive aging plan in place, we ended up needing to help them get into a care facility, a memory care facility that's 2 hours away. So it's not like she can easily get there to visit anymore, to make sure that he's properly taken care of. So we try to reach families proactively and say, the crisis is going to happen. We know that. So let's be prepared and know what our care options are and how to pay for them. Excellent transition. Denial. That is my biggest obstacle with any family, is they all think that they have more time to put a plan together, or they think that, well, mom and dad are doing okay. Well, they are until they aren't. They are until they fall, or until that disease progresses that they have. And then they end up waiting until crisis mode, and you can't expect to have great quality care options when you're in crisis mode, because you get whatever care is available to you and whatever you can afford. not having family meetings to discuss the end of life wishes or the aging issues. Like, what is our plan when dad has, another fall and he has Parkinson's and he can't live in his own home anymore because it's got stairs and it's not senior safe. Like, we need to start normalizing these what whens of aging conversations so that you're not like that family that now they're all scrambling because mom died. So they had to find a funeral home and pay for that. They had to do emergency guardianship and conservatorship for their dad and move them into a facility way far away from the family. So let's not wait until stuff like that happens. So again, not having the family meetings to discuss the end of life wishes and the what whens of life. And that's what we do, because families, you can't expect a family to discuss these things when they've never gone through it, or they don't understand it, or they have an understanding that Medicare is going to pay for everything, or that assisted living is the same as nursing homes. So that's why we facilitate these family meetings, and it's all education based. So then you can make thoughtful and informed decisions. And again, as we've talked about, not having your documents in order, I can tell you it is just a matter of time. Like, my mom has had dementia. She's passed away now, but my mom had dementia 2 weeks after she fell. My dad had a stroke. Thankfully, we have an aging plan in place for our parents. So it's not like we were all of a sudden having to huddle as the adult kids and be like, oh my gosh, here's what happened. What are we going to do? We already had that aging plan in place. So when mom fell, I was just like I was at court with the attorney, like, here's the power of attorney. Here's this, here's the HIPAA. Same thing when my dad had a stroke 2 weeks later. So these things are bound to happen. We just need to be prepared. Waiting too long.
One thing I wanted to talk about is some of the services that you provide. I know that when I first learned about Care Right Inc., one of the things that I love about your organization is how you partner with these families the way that you do, and you're truly working for them. So one thing I want to make clear is when it comes to finding care for your loved one, whether it's mental health for a special needs child, whether it's senior care, whatever it is, you mentioned Medicare. Basically, you got 100 days, and it's not even a full pay of 100 days. I think the first 20 is full pay, and then there's co-pays and stuff like that. So Medicare is not long-term care insurance, as you were mentioning. But one of the things that I really love about Care Right, and I won't name other organizations, but there are other organizations that you can partner with that will help you find a place for your loved one. If you need, some type of residential living, again, I'm not going to name names. But what I don't love about these organizations is they're not working for you. They're working for their best interest, because all of these care facilities pay them to place people. So you go and you say, I want to find a really good place for my parent, and I need this, this, and this. And they're semi-listening to you, but they're pigeonholing you into these facilities that give them the highest payout. And that is not in the best interest of your parent. So Care Right doesn't do that. They're partnering with you. They're not getting kickbacks from these facilities, and they are truly finding a facility that is a good fit for your loved one. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Right. And I'm glad you brought that up, because we are not a placement company. We are a fee-for-service fiduciary for our clients, and we aren't doing placement. We're helping you understand what different care options are available to you. So if like mom or dad need 2 different levels of care, we do the market research of these different care communities and say, okay, these 5 in your community will offer the different levels of care that your parents need. You financially qualify, so that if or when staying at home is no longer safe, feasible, or viable, you're already on the waiting list. That's the whole goal, is get on the waiting list proactively of these different care communities, so that if or when staying at home is no longer feasible, you have more confidence and probability of getting into communities that you've already got a comfort level with. But our biggest, like when I think of our biggest service delivery, it's families every single day are like, oh, thank you for facilitating our family meeting. Thank you for helping us understand dementia. Thank you for helping us understand caregiver burnout. And thank you for helping us be able to age in place at home by helping align the care team and overseeing the care team and working as your family and senior care advocate. And all of this is done virtually because families live everywhere, right? And so when you think about placement, you're right. Those placement companies, that's what they're kind of called. It's a transaction. There's no grab and go. There's no family meetings. It's like, ooh, Ethel needs assisted living, so we're going to suggest here, even if facility B or C was a better fit.
The thing about getting on the list, we talk about that a lot for a child with a disability, an adult child with a disability. Getting yourself on these lists, whether it's for a senior or for a loved one with a disability, gives you the right to say no if you come up on the list, but it also gives you the right to say yes. And so we're definitely big fans on that. And I love about the facilitating the family meetings. The thing is as you mentioned, most people come to you in crisis. We're encouraging everybody to get going early and not be in crisis. But one thing that happens for sure in crisis is that emotions run high and we see families torn apart. Somebody's emotional. They're sad that they're losing mom. They're sad that they're losing dad. There's money issues. There's all kinds of moving parts that somebody's angry about. Somebody's been giving more caregiving services than the other sibling that should have been helping, what have you. And emotions run high. So when you have, someone like you facilitating these family meetings that keeps the issues at hand, and trying to keep some of the higher emotions so maybe the family doesn't get torn apart by everything else that is going on. So tell us how CareRight can help long-term, short-term, long-term, and engaging your services.
Sure. So we have products and solutions and services for literally every budget. Like the cheapest product, if you will, is my book. I wrote the book, The Invisible Patient, the emotional, financial, and physical toll of family caregiving, because I've literally in 30 years had thousands and thousands and thousands of families that I've worked with. And they're like, we love mom and dad, because again, it's the adult kids coming to us. They're like, we love mom and dad, but we don't know how to best help them. So this is $20. It's on Amazon, or you can purchase it on the Invisible Patient book website. But we have solutions for literally every budget. It's just the reality is, because families come to us in crisis, a book isn't going to help you. You need actual hands-on, like, okay, this is what happened. These are ideas or solutions on how you can fix it. So we do the aging planning. Proactively is always going to be better. I always say this because I'm in Florida, so it's a very seasonal state. If you don't have reservations during season, you're not going to be able to get into a good quality restaurant, right? But that's okay, because there's always Subway, there's always Jimmy John's. But which would you rather have? So that's a good analogy. So let's look at that aging plan. Let's have these conversations now about the what whens of aging. End of life planning. Some families, they just hire us as kind of the death coach. Like, okay, mom is on hospice. We don't really understand what is going on. And so we walk them through the physical changes of what to expect towards end of life and family. I do 85% of our families, I do family mediation with them, because their relationships are so rocky. Education on aging and dementia, because you can't make smart decisions or informed or well thought out decisions when you don't even understand what the disease is that you're dealing with. One thing that I think is really special and unique about parents who have special needs children is parents research that disease forwards and backwards, and you know exactly how that's going to impact your child. But yet the adult kids who are coming to us, they have no idea what to expect with dementia. They don't understand Parkinson's. They're like, what? It's a progressive disease? Like, what does that mean? And so that's why we have to start with just basic education for families, so then you can make smart decisions. But it's just opening up that door of communication of what's working, what's not working well. What are the goals? As I said before, seniors want to stay at home, and that's great as long as they have the resources to do so. But then we also go through that, how to pay for care, the community matrix. That's where we do the market research. That's where we do the market research for families and talk about, well, if you live in Texas, but your kids all live in Ohio. Where does it make sense for you to actually live? So a lot of families will have us do care matrices for where their parents live, but also where they ultimately will probably end up living, because as adult kids, you just literally can't keep flying back and forth every time there's a problem or have to be an advocate. The tools for success that we talk about, because we have kind of two different kinds of clients. We have those that just want the white glove approach where they basically outsource all of this to us and pay for ongoing support and family meetings, care advocacy. But we also have those families that are more of the do-it-yourselfers. So they'll hire us to do the aging plan, like they hire you to do the financial plan or the legal plan. But then we don't know if they're going to for sure stay on services long term. Most of them do, but not all of them. So just in case we have those that just wanted the aging plan, we also teach you how to be a bold advocate, what you need to check for, make sure mom doesn't have 3 diapers on, make sure they're answering her call light. We also have the how to tour these care facilities if you're going to do this all on your own, how to tour care facilities, how to what are the differences between an independent living, assisted living, palliative care, hospice, what's daycare. So that way, in case we have a client that says, okay, we just want the aging plan and then we'll implement everything on our own, then at least they have the tools for success. And we've already talked about the grab and go binder.
For sure. Annalee, we have a question in the chat box about kind of getting on the list, and I'm just going to have you answer that in the chat box to that person specifically. Just last thing before we move on to Miss Christina, if somebody has more interest in Care Right, do you offer consultations, or how does that work?
Yeah, yep. So you can reach out to us on the Care Right Inc. website and schedule a free 30-minute consult.
For sure.
Yep.
All of our contact information is in today's slides, and you guys are going to get a copy of that. So how to reach out to any of the 3 of us, you will have all of that information. So good. And thank you for sharing all of that. And I think Care Right is truly a unique company. There's a lot of attorneys, there's a lot of advisors and things like that. But what you guys are doing is truly unique, and it is definitely needed. So you've brought a lot of things front and center, front of the mind here of things that need to happen. So let's talk about some of these legal documents and considerations from a legal perspective, Christina.
Well, first I want to
take it away.
Yeah, thank Annalee for just bringing up so many very important issues and making the marrying of the care plan with the legal document so beautifully stated. So thank you, Annalee. That was perfect. I, like Annalee, see people come to my office when it's a time of crisis. And unfortunately, sometimes what that means is that we're not able to even prepare estate planning documents for their loved one because their loved one no longer has capacity. So these important estate planning documents, primarily during a lifetime, we're looking at some type of power of attorney or trust to manage assets, is not able to be signed or executed. And then that forces the family into guardianship. And in some states, it's called conservatorship. I practice law in Texas, so I can't speak to what the laws are like in other states, but I can tell you Texas has even in the best situation, if someone's incapacitated and there's no one to make a financial decision for them, the legal process is expensive and time consuming. Like the confusion between Medicare and Medicaid, which we see in our office every single day, many people are misinformed thinking, oh, I've been married for so many years, so my spouse is my power of attorney. We don't need to get a power of attorney because I'm married. And that simply is not true. One of the heartbreaking cases I had years ago was a retired school teacher. Her husband had had a stroke. Their main asset, like a lot of our assets, was their retirement account. She didn't have a power of attorney for him. So I had to go to court and get guardianship over her husband that she'd been married to for over 50 years so she could access the retirement account to pay for care. Meaning also that we were delaying any type of Medicaid planning. So I, like you, my biggest challenge is clients' denial about what's going on, or not wanting to plan, or not wanting to think about it. So yeah, let's go to the next slide, Allison.
And I think a lot of times for a lot of our families, what I see is on most days we're drinking from the fire hose.
Yeah.
You know,
Of course.
between a full-time job and a full-time marriage and other children and one or, you know, two kids or adult kids with disabilities. At my house, I call it wheels on the bus, wheels off the bus. There's a lot of wheels off the bus days, right?
Mhm,
And it's
mhm.
like we're just trying to get by and do the best we can. And then days turns into weeks and weeks turns into years. And before you know it, what you were going to do hasn't got the attention that you had planned for it. And what I would say is in my practice, what I see is many people, and I would say probably a large percentage, maybe even up to 95% of the people in this meeting today either have no will or
Mhm.
have a grossly outdated will.
Mhm.
It hasn't been looked at in a
Mhm.
long time, which is probably is true for your parents as well. So I think that some of these documents and taking a look at these documents are important. So tell us about the documents that are needed.
So most clients come in, they always want to talk about dying because, you know, that's what's on our mind. We're always, as human beings, we know our time here is finite, but I try to redirect the conversation a little bit and say, dying to me is a lot less scary than incapacity. Because when you have passed away or at your death, a lot of unknowns are known. There may be a cleanup work and maybe a significant amount of cleanup work, but when you're disabled or incapacitated, we don't know what is going to happen always. And as I always tell every client, the disability community has open membership, meaning you can be a disabled person at birth all the way up into, you know, age, 90. So everybody over the age of 18 needs to think about these estate planning documents. And I realize people from out of state may be taking a look at this webinar, but every single person needs to have some type of document that provides for their assets. Here on our slide right now, this is about revocable trusts and wills. So these are the documents that would distribute your assets at death. Every state does this a little bit different, but in Texas, I can tell you when you die, the law divides the things that you own into two categories. Things that are going to pass outside of probate, maybe through a payable on death, beneficiary designation, and those things that are going to go through probate. That means there's no beneficiary designation, no legal instrument, no legal agreement. Another thing people get really confused about is, oh, we're married, dad passed away, we don't need to go through probate or any type of legal process. And that is simply not true. And again, I can't speak to other states, but in Texas, some type of legal process needs to happen. The other takeaway that I want everybody to know is that if you have a beneficiary on an account, that will trump your will. Allison and I have had many, many, many webinars and conversations on beneficiary designations. And I always tell my clients, if you get divorced, if you have had a change of life, if you've left a job, if you've had any kind of milestone or life change, please check those beneficiary designations because they may not track what your will or your trust says. And I like to have an Excel spreadsheet. I'm very much a document person. So I like to have an Excel spreadsheet with every single asset that a person owns and a column for what document is going to provide management of that asset during incapacity and what document is providing management at death. And Allison, I know you're going to have some other good information about beneficiary designations other than you and I obsess over them.
Christina and I, it's true, we do obsess over the beneficiary designations because the truth is a lot of people think that, oh, I just got my will and my special needs trust taken care of. Everything's all done. Brush your hands, walk away, everything's good. And that one last piece, those beneficiary designations, and it's not just your life insurance, it's your old 401k, your old pension plan, 403b, those things you forgot about that you had 15 years ago. Those all really matter. And the thing is, so first and foremost, we always say don't name your loved one with a disability directly as a beneficiary because that's going to that's going to affect their eligibility for state and federally funded programs. We'll talk about that later. So we don't want to name our loved one with a disability outright. But it's easy. So if you have done that, it's easy to change. It's free to change. All you have to do is call the company, call HR, whoever the carrier is for the life insurance and request a change of beneficiary form. You don't have to hire any of us to do it, but it should be on your list to just double check all of those things, because people die, people get divorced, things happen. So, it's just something that's off your radar and you don't think about it until somebody's sick or somebody dies. So thanks for bringing that up, Christina.
Sure. And the other thing I just want to mention is the other will or revocable myth that we see in our office is to totally disinherit an individual with a disability, which I have a big problem with, because there's always a better solution. And that's the problem with going to a general practitioner that's an estate planning attorney and not a special needs planning attorney. I've seen a lot of wills where mom or dad thinking, oh, well, we're going to leave our son or our daughter out as a beneficiary because we were told that if we leave them anything, it's going to disqualify them for the public benefits that have been supporting them. And I always tell the families there's a better way, and we're going to go ahead and introduce that term right now. And it's called a supplemental needs trust. Other states call it a special needs trust. In Texas, we use those two terms interchangeably. And by the way, you can use a supplemental needs trust in a will, and a will is a legal document that is not effective until your death, or you can put it into a revocable trust, which would be effective at your death. If you're planning for a child or other family member, I usually like a revocable trust with a supplemental needs trust in it, just because the funding is a lot faster. I always tell my clients, think of the revocable trust as like a cereal bowl that we established during your lifetime. You go to Allison, you have her assist you with a life insurance or other type of product that makes sense for your situation. We update the beneficiary designation so that at your death, that policy pays out immediately to a supplemental needs trust that's already created, and your child doesn't have to wait for the probate process to start. In other words, you have immediate funding. And one little tweak for everybody, and again, this is going to be Texas specific, is that if you're doing a supplemental needs trust for a spouse, it has to be in a will. And I believe that should be statewide because that is a federal statute. So there's one little tweak on that policy.
So I think the key on these supplemental needs trusts, or these third-party special needs trusts, as some people have heard them called, that the why behind it is the money within those trusts are not going to be basically counted for state and federally funded programs. So we have Medicaid guidelines, and that's a whole nother ballgame. We have that on our YouTube channel. But basically, it's more than $2,000 assets in a individual with a disability's name would make them lose their qualifications for Medicaid. So the why behind it, tell us more about that.
Yeah, so the why is, like you just said, a person can't have more than $2,000, so we set up these supplemental needs trusts. The other thing that we use them for is for a succession plan, because that's what we're talking about. That's what Annalee's talking about. That's what Allison's talking about, is what is our succession plan when we are no longer here, or when mom and dad can no longer stay at home, or when we pass away, we have an adult child. So what the supplemental needs trust does to address this issue is it's going to appoint individuals within a structure so that money stays protected and it's not floating around trying to figure out who's going to take care of it. If you leave money directly to a sibling, that sibling could get divorced, they could go through bankruptcy, they may just get in a car accident and not have enough car insurance, and now they're in a lawsuit. And that money that was set aside now goes to the creditors or the spouse that they're divorcing. The other time, sometimes we have supplemental needs trusts that we set up for clients who are not even interested in Medicaid for a variety of reasons. And what we do is we put the money into the trust, knowing that at least in Texas, we can draft the trust in a very flexible manner. So if the individual is not on Medicaid, we can make distributions that would either reduce or disqualify them for Medicaid. But we put those assets in a trust to protect maybe that individual from themselves or from being taken advantage of. And then maybe if we have a supplemental needs trust set up and that individual doesn't have access to that much money, maybe a guardianship never becomes necessary because they don't have access to all this money. So we do things, supplemental needs trust, the why is for a variety of reasons. And now I think estate planning attorneys, we're drafting our estate planning documents, or most even general practitioners, or they should be doing what we call a contingent supplemental needs trust. So even if there's not a person that's disabled, maybe there's a disability that happens after you sign the documents or become incapacitated or die, that individual that we didn't think we'd have to plan for has provisions made for them. And I think we have a question about a first versus a third supplemental needs trust? I think that's on a coming up slide. Is that correct, Allison?
I think so. Let's, um,
Oh,
yeah. Let's
okay, we
talk
did
about
it.
that. I think
We did it. Oh,
that's a great segue. And
good
I
timing,
think, you know,
chatbot.
yes, for sure. So yeah, tell us about the difference. I think, you know, we start throwing around all these terms that we're very familiar with, but you know, if you don't eat, sleep, and breathe this, it starts getting confusing. Tell us about the differences.
Okay, so when a person has money in a trust, where the money comes from depends on what kind of trust we put it in. So for a third party supplemental needs trust, that is our pre-planners. That's going to be people working with Annalee years ahead of time, working with Allison years ahead of time. So we have money established that never hits the pocketbook or the account or the name of the individual that we're planning for. That's called a third party trust, meaning the funds come from a third party, not the individual, third party funds. And
so examples are like life insurance or assets, you know, retirement assets when we die. It could be a house, all of those examples.
And so the story I'm going to tell you is I have an amazing nephew. He's 13 and full of beans. He's so spicy and he's medically fragile. And his name is James. And I have a third party supplemental needs trust set up for him. It's empty now. It's just a document sitting with like $100. And so at my death, James is going to have a life insurance policy paid into that supplemental needs trust. And because it was that money never hit his name, if he dies, I can leave whatever's left over into that trust to my sons and then to a charity that I've named in the document. Now, let's say I didn't do that. I just named James in his individual capacity as the beneficiary of this life insurance policy. And then I die, James is the beneficiary. Well, besides him being a minor, which is a whole another bucket of problems, that money would have to go into what we call a first party supplemental needs trust, and then it has to meet all this very strict criteria. The worst one being at his death, anything that's left in that first party trust, because the money belonged to him because I didn't do any pre-planning, has to go back to the state or states that provided Medicaid services on what we call a pro rata basis, meaning if Texas got paid out the most, then Texas gets the most of the leftovers. If Michigan was the second, then Michigan gets the whatever left over. So that's why we tell the clients, the third party trust is where you want to direct all of your assets to go to a person with a disability in your life. And that could even be a spouse. So Annalee works with spouses. Maybe one person has dementia and we may want to set up a supplemental needs trust in their will. And then that way, any money in that supplemental needs trust is not going to be counted for Medicaid, and they get to still stay on Medicaid and have money left over to pay for things that Medicaid doesn't. I think we had a question.
So, yeah, I think we're going to address that question in just a minute as far as like, you know, paying for things, how does income from a special needs trust? I think we could just do that quickly. But the bottom line is there's a broad range of things that you can pay for out of a special needs trust. But if the individual is getting SSI right now, if you pay for food and shelter out of a special needs trust, there would be a 1/3 reduction to SSI, and that's on the chopping block. It hasn't been chopped yet. We are always hopeful that it's going to get chopped.
Yes.
But I want to also mention on these first party supplemental needs trusts, sometimes a person may need a first party special needs trust because there was a lawsuit, there was a settlement, there might have been a medical malpractice. It's the individual's money, scholarships.
And we see that frequently. A lot of times with the larger personal injury awards, we'll see maybe a bank might get involved as a trustee. In Texas, there's special rules for who can be the trustee for a certain amount. I used to draft these first party supplemental needs trust as a part of our regular drafting, but after the 2016 S&T Fairness Act, if the person has capacity or has a power of attorney, they can set up their own first party supplemental needs trust. And just a couple of other quick details on these first supplemental needs trusts. The trusts have to be drafted so that the money that comes out has to be for the sole benefit of that beneficiary. There's a lot of controversy and information about that policy. And it also has to, at least in Texas, I think Florida is different. The money has to go in there before age 65, and that's going to be a state by state difference. And so that brings me to this interesting thing on Medicaid that we've touched on gently during this webinar. As we've talked about Medicaid, and the Medicaid rules vary greatly from state to state. Medicaid is federally funded, state funded. There are certain minimal requirements that the feds have, and then the states make their own rules. So that's why if you have a disabled child and you're moving from Texas to Florida, you're going to want to make sure you hook up with a Florida attorney, and vice versa if you're moving. So that's just a little something, because Medicare is going to be more uniform, and then Medicaid is going to be incredibly different when you cross a state's borders, which is very confusing for clients.
And we have, and I know that we're kind of running out of time for today. Somebody said they needed a first party special needs trust for child support, and that is true.
That is
if
true.
You get child support post age 18 for your loved one and then apply for SSI, that child support is going to be counted against you. If the child support is redirected to that first party special needs trust, then it's not going to be counted. So that is a special thing.
And the one thing
that I want
to, the one caveat really quick there, Allison, that is a Texas, or I believe we are in the S&T review team region 6. And I believe it is a very specific region of the United States, just to further complicate things. But in Texas, you can use a first party S&T for a divorce situation.
So one thing that I want to mention, because we are going to run out of time for today, we have entire webinars, even with Christina, even with Annalee, on special needs trust, on guardianship. Hit the highlights for us on guardianship and alternatives to guardianship.
Sure.
Just know,
Sure.
if you want to go deeper, we have an entire webinar on these topics, so you can go deeper.
Yeah, so here's kind of the Cliff Notes version. Everybody over the age 18 that has the ability to understand and sign a financial medical power of attorney, HIPAA release, directive to physicians, and I'm using Texas-based terms here, needs to sign them, which means when you're sending your kids off to college, as Allison and I have talked about in the past, please get their powers of attorney signed, and at least a HIPAA release. Now, the other big question I have is, I have a child with a disability. I've told I have to run out and get guardianship right away. Otherwise, the state's going to come take my child. In Texas, at least, that's absolutely not true. You can get guardianship anytime after age 18. And the Texas Estate Code says before we pursue guardianship, and the guardianship is where you get legal authority to make a medical or financial decision for someone who's over the age of 18, sometimes under the age of 18, depending on the situation, who cannot make decisions for themselves. I have to show the court two things: that there's no least restrictive alternative, that I haven't looked at a power of attorney or another document that's called a supported decision making, and that there's no support or service available that could make that guardianship process unnecessary. So even if I have a family come to me, and I had this conversation last week with a client, and I said, listen, we have to go through this process so that we can make a decision and go to court on whether guardianship is appropriate. Guardianship, by the way, is a legal process. Some people call it conservatorship in Texas. The individual that is going under the guardianship has to be served by a constable. They also have to have their own attorney called an attorney ad litem. And there's also something called a PCME, which is a physician certificate of medical exam, to document that this individual is incapacitated according to the Texas statute and is unable to handle his or her affairs. So you can start the guardianship process prior to 18, but you're not going to be able to file an application or get a pleading set until they turn 18. The supported decision-making agreement allows a parent to, or a guardian or a care provider to speak to third parties, but not necessarily make decisions for them. It's really meant to help that individual who's signing the document be able to make decisions for themselves. So I don't know.
And not all states have a supported decision-making agreement. So that is important to note, because we do have people that kind of come to us from all states. And so I would like to invite everyone to go out to the Consolidated Planning Group YouTube channel to take a deep dive with Christina on guardianship and alternatives to guardianship and the special needs trust and these legal documents. But one thing that we were talking about a moment ago on some of these legal documents, the power of attorney and healthcare power of attorney, you mentioned, our college kids and things like that. Mm-hmm. But I also wanted to mention, again, having these conversations with your aging parents while they are still of capacity. It's really important to get these things in place. I had a client a couple of years ago whose mother passed away, and there were like 9 successor people named in her will, which was a lot for me from what I've seen in the past. And every single one of them were deceased except for one who had Alzheimer's. And
nice.
because it had been that long since they had looked at it. So, from a perspective of kind of where we are and where we're going, we really always talk about, who's going to care for your loved one when you no longer can. At Consolidated Planning Group, we're going to help you develop that comprehensive special needs care plan. People come to us because they want to understand, how much do I need to fund that special needs trust? How much money do we need to plan for the special needs trust? We do a lot of education and helping people understand the various programs that are available out there, such as Texas Medicaid waivers. There are Medicaid waivers all across the U.S. in every state. They're called something different. They're all called Medicaid waivers, but they all have different names. There's different programs in different states. Some states don't have any waiting list at all. Texas and Florida are 2 of the worst states in the United States as far as the long waiting list. We're around about 17 years, give or take a little bit. It's a pretty long time. But, understanding the difference, you guys talked about, we throw around those terms Medicaid and Medicare synonymous, and they're not synonymous. People throw around those terms SSI and SSDI synonymously, and they're not synonymous. They're 2 very, very different programs. So we help educate families on those. We help people open ABLE accounts. ABLE accounts are places where you can have money that is not going to be counted against the loved one with a disability for SSI and Medicaid purposes. I think some of the stuff we've really already talked about as far as touring facilities, getting on these waiting lists. We talked about some of these beneficiary designations, and we just really help put a plan in place. Where are we? How can we have a comfortable retirement and enjoy it? Our semblance of retirement, if you have a loved one that has care needs the rest of their life, is different from somebody else's whose kids sail off into the sunset after college, right? And so, I liken it to a marathon, not the sprint. And so we've got to have some supports built in for ourselves as caregivers for some semblance of the retirement that we had hoped for. Maybe that's some travel, maybe it's some volunteering, some other things that you might want to do. So we help with all of those things. We spend time talking about having money in the right buckets. So Christina talked about the special needs trust, the first party, third party special needs trust. The ABLE account is another place, and that is another place where we have a specific webinar just for the ABLE account, the who, what, where, when, why, how much on an ABLE account. But that is something that you may consider. The ABLE account had a requirement for a disability that started prior to age 26. And in 2026, that age is going up to the disability began before age 46, just so you know. But these are tax-free savings, tax-free distributions, and basically it's subject to the gift tax exclusion, which right now is $17,000 for the year. And if it can be construed as achieving a better life for an individual with a disability, you can pay for it out of an ABLE account, and it does not count against for SSI or Medicaid. So we're really out of time for today. You guys have been a great and asking the questions that you've asked. We all offer consultations, so you can reach out to us directly for your care needs and kind of the step that you're on the planning process. And again, we invite you to go to the YouTube channel because you can take a deeper dive with both Annalee and Care Right, and a deeper dive with Christina Lesher as well. It's certainly been my pleasure partnering with both of you guys today, and such great information. And thanks for helping us put all this together. Thanks everybody for being here today.
Thanks. Everybody have a good day.
Bye now.